Hi, everyone. This is Landry Etheridge with Etheridge Counseling Group, and we have Dr. Etta Gant here to talk about emotions, particularly guilt and shame, which I'm very interested in this idea. It's a very common human experience of feeling shame and guilt or attempting to avoid feeling shame and guilt. And this is the last part of a 4-part series, Etta, that you have written about emotions called, the series is called Don't Blame the Messenger. Can you talk a little bit about what that title means, Don't Blame the Messenger, as it relates to emotions?
Yeah. So the title is in reference to the fact that our emotions are telling us something. They belong in our body because they are cues for us to understand how we are processing the world around us and what we're supposed to do about it. So we might feel sad because of a loss in our lives, and that's okay. It means that this is a change that's very difficult, and so we have to work through that sadness, share it, cry it out, whatever it is, to get to the other side.
Gotcha. Okay. So emotions are crucial. What I'm hearing is emotions are important. We don't want to get rid of them. Um, Emotions might feel uncomfortable, but they can still be helpful. They're carrying messages with them that we need to understand. So how does that relate to shame and guilt? What is shame and guilt? Are they the same thing or are they different? What is how would you describe that emotion that's common to so many of us?
Yeah, so they are really similar and often accompany each other. But guilt is more so like based on an action, something we've done. And shame is based more on like how we're identifying, like our identity as a person. And these two are really complex. They can be complicated because mostly of like messages from the world around us. So it's hard. There's like a little tiny space where shame and guilt are like a productive message that we're receiving. But a lot of times we're carrying shame and guilt that maybe like doesn't fully belong to us. That's being placed on us, like something from the outside world is making us feel that way versus it coming from within. So like one example, I use sadness. That's coming from within. I'm sad that I just lost my job or due to layoffs, right? That's coming from me versus feeling guilty over eating dessert. That's coming from like messages about food being bad or dessert will make you fat or all of these things that are like just messages from
Societal messages, external. External rules about us or our behavior.
Yeah, the rule piece is crucial, right? Like losing your job comes from something outside of you, but it's not necessarily like, sure, shame and guilt might follow that. But the actual loss itself or losing a person, that is like, that's evoking sadness. So with shame and guilt, so much of it we're carrying that necessarily doesn't belong to us. But that little wiggle room of it serving a purpose is crucial. And we avoid that, or not all of us, but it's very common to avoid that space of shame and guilt, which I'll get into, because shame and guilt are usually like latent with implications that there's something wrong with us. Because we've done something bad, that might mean we're unlovable or unworthy, and essentially that we're not able to make a mistake. And so because of all those societal values or feelings of conditional worth, we think that if we're experiencing shame and guilt, our world might end around us. But there's a little space where shame and guilt is serving a purpose. So
there's this little window of opportunity. So much of it isn't helpful or isn't healthy to feel this external burden being placed on us. But it sounds like there's this little window where there's some opportunity.
So one of my favorite examples is, because again, we all make mistakes. We all let each other down and we hurt people. We are human and we're messy and we cannot be perfect all the time. So first, accepting that is where shame and guilt can be helpful. So guilt is telling us I've done something wrong, I've made a mistake, and it's cueing us to either apologize for that mistake and see what we can do to make it right. So maybe you were being silly or, falling into sarcasm and you've ended up hurting a friend. You hit a nerve and they have let you know, like, hey, that joke like did not land well with me. And it's like, it really hurt my feelings. Like, ouch, that hurts. Like, you feel really guilty. And that's that place of like, okay, here's a window of opportunity here to apologize and see what I can do. Like, that guilt is telling you I need to say sorry and I need to ask if there's anything I can do. And maybe there's nothing you can do and maybe the sorry is enough, or maybe they need space and don't want to talk to you for a little bit. That's unfortunate. And maybe there's sadness there that has to be processed.
New emotion, yeah.
But it's cueing us to make that situation right. And we avoid that a lot. We avoid that feeling of having done something wrong. There's the immediate, oh, I didn't mean to say or do that, or which may be true, but that has to be followed with kind of like a genuine apology. And so a shame, again, very small window, but it does serve a purpose. And the negative messages that we could receive from shame is that I'm bad. I am not a good person. And that's not what it's telling us. It's telling us that we are acting out of line with our values. So I'm feeling ashamed of the person I was last night. I drank too much and I got kicked out of the bar and I left my best friend there and all the things I hurt a bunch of people and I was acting a fool, all these things that don't feel like who we are. That's acting out of line with our values. It doesn't mean that we're a bad person, but it makes us consider, okay, I need to get a grip on my substance use or whatever it is. That's the message there. But usually because of messages around like making a mistake, doing something wrong, that shame becomes debilitating. And it's never, shame and guilt are never going to be able to be processed well if we're not compassionate with ourselves or if we're not seeking empathy from someone else. Otherwise, the messages of I'm bad, I'm bad, I'm bad, I'm unworthy, this is unfixable will just take over and will become debilitating.
So what I hear you say is like to take ownership of the mistake or the behavior, but not let it become a part of our identity. I am bad, or along the lines of this emotion is letting me know I really care about acting in line with my values, and I didn't do that there, but I want to in the future. It sounds like there's action attached to it is what make it helpful.
Right. Guilt, I've made a mistake. I forgot I should have played to work or whatever the thing is. And then shame is I'm repeatedly, making this mistake that feels like not who I really am. In the same way that anger is telling us maybe this person is crossing into like hurting my values or it's crossing my boundaries. Shame is telling us I'm the person.
I'm that person. I cross my own boundaries, and I want to get back.
But like I said, a lot of the shame and guilt that we're carrying is like guilt around body image, shame around body image, guilt and shame following a trauma. A lot of that, it's still because we're feeling it. We've got to feel it and see what it's telling us. But it's not necessarily that a purposeful accountability piece. It might just mean like I feel humiliated, but that has to do with something else has made you feel humiliated, and sharing that with anybody that feels safe to you can be healing. Have that feeling be met with empathy. The feeling of humiliated is that feeling of I'm not worthy, right? I've done something wrong. I'm at risk from being ostracized and being isolated.
Yeah, it sounds like inherently in that is, you mentioned like crucial with shame and guilt is to act with compassion towards yourself, because a component of it is I have to forgive myself for not being perfect.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
And it's so common following a trauma to kind of cling to that shame and guilt because it's things that are outside of our control. Someone hurting you, a natural disaster, a horrible accident, whatever the thing is, it almost feels scarier to be like helpless to that and accept like that maybe you played a very little part in it. Whereas clinging to guilt and shame, I should have done this. I didn't do this. I didn't remind that person to wear their seatbelt enough times for them to fully remember. Sometimes feels like we have more control over the situation. And so sometimes following a trauma or a loss, we cling to guilt and shame as a way to feel a sense of safety or control.
Feeling more in control when in fact possibly you like you said, you may have played a very small role. It actually happened, and that can feel scary because you have to acknowledge that wasn't in
Bad
control.
things can happen and I have no control over that, and that's extremely difficult to accept.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I'm so glad that you're tackling this topic because it is such a huge topic and goes so deep. And and I think it kind of thrives in the dark. It thrives in secrecy. And so I think a lot of people do struggle with those two because they're often so much in secret. Whereas joy tends to be expressed so easily externally, or sadness, people can pick up on that. But this shame and guilt, it can really, I think, thrive in secrecy. So thank you so much for writing this part 4 of this series on emotions and emotions as messengers. And thanks again for chatting about it with us today.
Yeah, thanks.
Brilliant.
So